Right, what's up, Dragon Brood? Today we're going to go over what I think are 10 of the, I guess, my favorites or even most important cards of Thunder Junction, because there's a lot, but we had to narrow it down to 10, so here we go. Okay, this first one, Final Showdown, I'm not a fan. I don't think we need more sweepers in Standard, but y'all know how I feel about that if you're regulars on the channel. However, this card's really good. It gives you the ability to sweep at instant speed for 6 mana, which is huge. We can't understate that in any way, shape, or form. However, I think that's the part getting all the hype. I think people are not paying attention to the other two abilities on here to have all creatures lose all abilities until end of turn, which is huge because that allows you to take away stuff even like Death Touch or flying or whatever, and you could really shift combat, which could be kind of crazy, which means this is a card that could be played in potentially aggro decks, not just control decks. And choose a creature you control, it gains indestructible end of turn. Also important to be used as a defensive option or even combat tricky or whatever. There's a lot going on with this card, and the cost really outside of the sweeper isn't all that much. Like, you get basically for 2 mana or even 3, a really fun combat situation for aggro decks while also getting a big sweeper for control decks. Right, next up we have Bristle Bud Farmer. This is a 4 mana 5/5 with trample. It happens to be a plant druid. When it comes into play, it makes 2 food tokens, which is already great. And then on top of that, whenever you attack, you may sacrifice one of those food tokens if you so choose. And if you do, you get to mill 3 cards and put a permanent from among them into your hand. Now, okay, first things first. This is a 4 mana 5/5 with trample, which is amazing for the cost, right? Usually when we get 4 mana 5/5s, there's some type of drawback. This one also comes with trample, and then on top of that, even if it dies, let's say your opponent plays Go for the Throat right when you cast it, you still get 2 food, so you're going to have something to show for it. This makes it a powerful card even against mono red, because they either have to spend like their best removal card or possibly 2 for 1 this guy, but then you have 2 food left over, and that's 6 life, right? But if you get to attack with it, now you have all types of things where you're getting to fill your graveyard, you're getting to remove cards from your graveyard, so that can work with Insidious Roots. Like, you're getting to put another permanent in your hand, which is going to likely be a land percentage-wise, or a creature, because that's mostly what mono green or Gruul plays. And then you can possibly just ramp up on that turn, right? So you go from 4 to maybe a land in your hand, or now you have 5, so you're guaranteed to hit your land. And like, there's a lot going on with this card, but it's such a huge body for 4 mana. And if plants are an actual thing, this card will be one of the backbones of that deck, I'd imagine. You know, if there's anything I could say about this, it's probably just F this card. Because honestly, 3 steps ahead is ridiculous, right? Okay, think about it right now. People are already willing to play 3 mana counter spells. That's not that weird. So that's like the basic that this, like the worst this card is going to be. So you get blue, colorless, counter, fine. But then you also get to tack on 3 mana to make a copy of target artifact or creature you control. That is fantastic. Like, why would you not want that? And then on top of that, you can also just pay an additional 2, draw 2, discard a card. Like, very likely, there's going to be a lot of scenarios where your opponent just pays 5 mana, counter your spell, draw 2, discard 1. Right? But as a combat trick, they could just copy something. And understand, it's not even just copy a creature you control, it's also an artifact. So this is already can fit into these artifact control piles. You know, like, there's tons of different things you can do with this. This is good for older formats, even if you want to copy some things. Or if you just want to copy effect, but also want to be able to have a counterspell, like, these spree cards open up options for so many things. And this is one, the more I look at it, I'm just like, ah, this is going to be a pain, because now you're not just worried about something being countered, it's what else comes with it, right? Because this could also be a combat trick, even when you're trying to slip past a counterspell. So this one, really good. All right, you know, there was no way you were going to get by if there's a quality dragon on PowrDragn's channel that I wasn't going to get to talk about it. And honestly, this is actually one of my favorite dragons of all time in Terror of the Peaks. I actually play this in a couple of commander decks. It's really good. But you got a 5 mana 5/4 with flying. If your opponent targets us with a spell, they have to pay an extra 3 life. And then every creature that comes onto the battlefield after that gets to deal damage to a target equal to its power. And the best part about this is the damage from the creatures entering, you can deal to anything. It'd be a planeswalker, a creature, a player. Awesome. This is a 5 power flyer, really good. If your opponent does want to shoot it, they're going to have to spend some amount of life, and that's if you don't have a way to protect it, which they would still have to pay the 3 life. So yeah, lots going on with this card. This was also a really strong reprint. This is a card people have really wanted to see reprinted. People are going to be excited about this. It's gonna see some play. It's obviously big for Commander and will continue to be for years to come. Yeah, there's a lot to be excited about on this card. And if you've been looking for that thing for your Gruul deck or your kind of mid-rangey red decks or whatever, this is exactly the card you want, right? It's a big threat on its own, but on top of that, now every single thing you play after that becomes a significant threat. So they almost have to deal with this even before dealing with your other big monster. So yeah, love this card a lot. Not a surprise it made my list, and I'm definitely going to be playing with this quite a bit. All right, Gold Vein Hydra. Now, before I get into this card, let me at least say, I while I think this card is good, I don't think it's at the hype level that so many people are giving it. However, I'd love to be wrong about it. Because here's the thing, right? You can actually just play this for 3 mana, so you get a 2/2 with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. This works like every Hydra, where however much you spend is how many counters you get. But it comes with 3 abilities, and on top of that, whenever it dies, you get that many tap treasure tokens that are equal to its power. So this also has a weird thing too, that if you are playing a +1/+1 counters deck and you get to just keep adding stuff to it, you're going to get more treasure, which opens the door for more things to happen. So like that's an option. But again, if you play this early, you attack with it as a 2/2, maybe you trade off with some early creature, or maybe the opponent doesn't block because they don't even want to give you the treasure, right? That's a thing. But if they do, now you have the treasure and you've got 5 mana potential, well, 6 mana on the following turn. Like that's really strong. The other thing too is this is a good top deck, right? Because it has haste and trample. So if your opponent sweeps the board, now you go ahead and play this as a 4 or 5 power attacker and you're right back at it. If they kill it, great. Now you have a pile of mana and you can play 2 or 3 things the following turn. Or use that treasure to activate your lands that you might have if you have creature lands. Or there's even a Magda in this set that you could just sacrifice treasure to turn into Scorpion Dragons. So this can fit into a lot of different decks. A deck that's just playing aggro-y stuff, say like Gruul or Mono Green. If you're wanting to play something with treasure, it can fit that. If you just want it to be a late game option in your ramp deck, that's also a thing. So I think this can find a home in a couple of different places. It'd be interesting to see how this card ends up getting used. All right, well, let me just say, if there was a place that we actually trained the no fun police, this would be the thing putting together the itinerary and the workouts. Because pest control is definitely no fun, but it's a damn good card, right? It's white black for a sorcery, destroy all non-land permanents with mana value 1 or less, and just for grins, you can cycle it for 2 mana. Now, the interesting thing about this card, I think people have looked at and like, oh, this is for all those Boros, aggro, whatever decks, which it does do a number on those, no surprise. But this does also get rid of things like map tokens, treasures, blood tokens, right? Super annoying. But also other random enchantments or artifacts that happen to cost 1 or less, I guess, if you made copies and such. Like this is a surprisingly good card. I'm really surprised there hasn't been a little bit more hype around this. Now I will say this, if you play best of 3, it's probably just a sideboard card, but it's a very good sideboard card, right? It works against token decks, again, against treasure decks, things like that. It's really, really powerful. And if you end up in a situation where you just don't need it anymore, well, you at least get a card for it because you can cycle it for 2 at instant speed even. Like, this doesn't really have much downside. It's a great sideboard card. If you're playing best of 1, you can probably even main deck a couple because, again, you just pay 2 and draw. It's a worst case scenario for this card. I expect we're going to see a lot of this floating around on the arena ladders. All right, next up we have Smuggler Surprise. This isn't too much of a surprise, I don't think. Like, this card is getting some talk and people are excited about it. I think mostly because people like the idea of, like, what if I pay 6 mana, which is basically what it is, because you can, one of the modes is pay 4 and a green, so you're paying 6 total mana to put 2 big creatures into play. You get to put 2 creatures from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, the other parts of this also are very useful, right? You could pay the 1 green plus 2 colorless and mill 4 cards, and you can put up to 2 creatures and or lands from among those milled cards into your hand, right? And if you need stuff to discard, this is great for that. Or if you're just looking for certain cards that you want to cast, great for that. If you're just playing this in a ramp deck and you want to be able to make sure you get some things you want, put them in their hand, and then get them into play, that's an option. However, I do like the last part of this, where you can just pay an additional 1, so 2 total mana, to protect 4 power creatures that you have by giving them indestructible and hexproof. Like, that's probably the most useful part of this card, and I think it's the part that's being overshadowed by the others. But the reality is, That's like almost a heroic intervention just for your big creatures. And honestly, that's usually what you want to save anyway. You're not overly worried about your mana creatures or whatever many times. Like this could be a super strong card for the mono green decks. Also, if you're trying to play any type of ramp decks, this could fit in there. If you have some big monsters you're trying to get into play, honestly, even blue green or green red could possibly use this, even just to protect your creatures. And then you get the bonus of maybe getting to put some of those things into the into the battlefield for free. So I like a lot of what this card's doing. Now, this is one of the other reprints in the set that I really like, and that's Archangel of Tithe. Now, this is 4 mana, 3 of which is white, so you have a colorless white, white, white for a 3/5 flying angel. But when it's untapped, if your opponents want to attack you or a planeswalker, they have to pay an extra 1 for each creature. If you're attacking with this, then your opponent has to pay an additional 1 for each thing they want to block with. Like, this really causes problems for your opponents, both attacking and blocking, and kind of lets you control the combat a little bit more. And also, I would include the fact that in multiples, this thing becomes super annoying. I don't think that's something that's been considered by a lot of people. Like, if you get more than one, this becomes really hard for your opponents to deal with. And it's also 5 toughness, so it's not the easiest thing to get rid of. And if you're able to play this right behind a Giada on 2, which is already in the Angel decks, then you have a 4/6 that becomes even more difficult to get rid of. Now, I don't know where this sits in the Angel decks because they already have several 3 and 4 mana cards, but they're definitely going to find room for at least a couple of these, I would imagine. But it's good enough that we might even see this being played in non-Angel decks. Again, if you're targeting some of those mono red, the Boros Convoke tokens list, maybe even some really low to the ground Gruul decks, like this really puts a problem on those decks as they're kind of light on mana to begin with, and they have to spend a lot of resources just to be able to try to attack with 2 or 3 cards, which you're going to block very effectively. So yeah, this card, a little bit overlooked, maybe because it's been reprinted and it wasn't like a stud or a superstar previously, but the metagame looks totally different now than it did then, and I think now it might actually be more useful. Next up is Lively Durge. This is also a spree card for a colorless and a black. It's a sorcery, but for an additional 1, you search your library for a card and you put it into your graveyard, then shuffle. Or for an additional 2 mana, you return up to 2 creature cards with total mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. There's a couple of reasons I like this. The first is that for 3 mana, you can put something into your graveyard. And notice it doesn't say creature card in your graveyard. So if you have something else you're trying to get into play, or maybe it's some other card that works from the graveyard, especially in older formats where you may want to play something with flashback, this could be really good. Or even in lands type decks, right? With Life from the Loam, maybe you want to put certain things in the yard. Like this is a thing you could do. But being able to return 2 creatures with power 4 or less, very strong. There's a lot of cards that fits this requirement. It's mana value, so let me be clear about that. But even then, there's still a lot. One of those things being potentially a Shieldred, and we know how annoying that is. But if you want to get all of that, that's only 5 mana, which put this on par with a lot of Reanimator spells that tend to be 4 or 5 mana, but in this case, you get 2 things, and one of them you get to search for and put there. This card has potential to be very good. I don't know if it's played in just Reanimator style decks, or maybe you just play a couple of copies in your Rakdos or Black X mid-rangey decks. But yeah, I would not be surprised to see this card really turn around some long game situations. And Great Train Heist. This is another spree card. Notice that the spree cards are really good in this set, y'all. Like, really, really good. But this is 1 red plus, and those pluses are 2 colorless and a red. You untap all the creatures you control. If it's your combat phase, there's an additional combat phase after this one. So for 4 mana, you just get to do everything during your combat step again, which means all the stuff that triggers at the beginning of combat, etc., also all goes off. So that's a thing to keep in mind. For 2 additional mana, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain first strike. So for 3 mana, you just have a really good combat trick, right? Your opponent lines up all their blocks. Now all your stuff gets +1, some things first strike down, a few things of theirs, and possibly you win that combat. Or you can just pay an additional 1 red mana, choose target opponent, and whenever your creatures deal damage to them, you get a tapped treasure token. Again, we've talked about some decks that care about having treasures, so this card obviously fits in those. But all of these modes are good, right? If you just don't have much to do otherwise, you're like, okay, I'm attacking with 3 or 4 little 1/1s. Maybe I'm getting 3 treasures so I can do something bigger the next turn. That's only 2 mana. Or You pay 3, and then now you're getting some advantage in combat because of first strike and that extra attack bonus, or power bonus, I should say. And then just getting a whole other attack step, right? You untap everything and you do it again, especially if you have dragons or things with trample or something like that, or anything that triggers at the start of combat to give you some extra ability. I'm thinking of things like the partners, Alana and Elena, like you get to give something else an additional +2 and do it again, or even Reckless Stormseeker at the beginning of combat, give something +1/+0 and trample, right? Like there's a whole bunch of things you can do that'll work well with this card. And it's going to fit a lot of decks, and honestly, even just getting a surprise extra 3 or 4 damage across a couple of creatures could be enough to end the game. And as a reminder, if you want to pick up any of these cards, check out the link below so you can find your local store to go pick up these cards. Thunder Junction is just around the corner, and there's a lot of sweet stuff in this set. But also, down in the comments, let me know. Do you think my list is terrible? Are there cards I should be liking more that I'm not? Something I'm not talking about? Or do you agree totally? Either way, I want to hear from you. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.